and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Katherine Bennett, and I'm joined today by my friend Pierpaolo Finaldi, friend, fellow parishioner, and CEO of the CTS, the Catholic Truth Society, and a familiar face to many of you, I'm sure, our eldest, Emily Bennett. And the reason I've asked you to come and join me here today is to talk about this festival you've both been at over the past weekend, and it's the first of its kind. So let's start with you, Piero. Tell us how this came to be. What was it? Where was it held? How many people attended? Give us the lowdown.
So this was the We Believe Festival, which was held under the auspices of the Guild of Our Lady of Ransom at St Mary's College, Oscott, on the outskirts of Birmingham. And there were kind of a number of things that had come together that gave Monsignor Armitage the idea to put this thing together. One was the 1700th anniversary of the Creed, hence the title We Believe. The other thing was the 175th anniversary of the reinstitution of the Catholic hierarchy in the UK. And the other thing that he's been talking about a lot is that we're 8 years away from 2033, which will be 2,000 years since the death and resurrection of Christ. And his idea has been to have a kind of octave of evangelization leading up to that period. And I think it came, I mean, although it's been a couple of years in the making, it also came hot on the heels of the report that came out at Easter on the quiet revival of the faith in the UK. And I think that particular, statistical work featured quite heavily in the talks and the discussions over those days. I mean, one of the really interesting points, and one of the things which I think made it a particularly place to go to, etc., was that this wasn't a big conference taking place in like a secular space. It was taking place in one of the most important places for the life of the faith in this country. Not only because it's a beautiful place, it's a beautiful seminary, but also because Newman preached his second spring sermon in the very chapel in which various masses were celebrated over the weekend. And he, spoke about that moment when, the Catholic emancipation had gone through. All of a sudden the Catholics in this country were able to take a much greater part in the affairs of state, to be part of the universities, to really to start building churches again. And in that moment, he sort of said, this is the time for a second spring of the faith in this land. So 150 odd years on, with these great stats showing that really maybe we've kind of turned the corner of the sort of what seemed like an endless decline. Maybe it's time for a third spring, where better to start a third spring from, and who better to start it with? Because it was just amazing, like just full of the very best that this country has to offer in terms of the faith. And there were a couple of keynote speakers from abroad, but mainly the people who spoke at the festival were kind of homegrown talent, should we say, people whose life of faith has been nurtured in this country and who are able to speak in a very kind of specific, enculturated way to our fellow countrymen who are in such desperate need to hear the good news. Anyway, it was massive. It was a great kind of showcase for everything that's best in the church. And frankly, 2-3 days after it's finished, I'm still kind of buzzing from the experience.
That's wonderful. You messaged me and you said, I have to say there's definitely a sense that we're back as Catholics. And I thought that's such a hopeful message, especially because we spend quite a lot of our time, Gavin often talks as a former Protestant about give back our churches. This is the foundation. It's a Catholic foundation. And to then get a message from you saying we were at this festival and we're back. None of us could be there this year, although we're sad to report that and hope to go if it's on again next year. Perhaps this will become an annual thing. That may be the intention. But it sounds wonderful. You mentioned a few key names, and I'll come to you about those in a moment. But you're talking about Catholic emancipation and build churches. Also, there was this sense that you build schools. Was there much on Catholic education, on the state of Catholic education, many talks on that, or where it's going?
Yeah, so I mean, it was quite cleverly kind of set up. So there was a huge tent that St. Peter's that held the kind of plenary sessions, and then there were smaller tents that were basically set according to the three transcendentals. So there was the truth tent, the beauty tent, right, and the goodness tent. And basically, you know, the talks were divided up by theme. There were lots of other venues within the beautiful buildings of Oscott as well. And, you know, really there was, in terms of the subjects of the talks, there was a huge amount. I mean, I must say, you know, for example, we at CTS, we launched Professor Bullivant's latest book looking at the statistics behind the Quiet Revival. And we did get to speaking about, you know, the traditional kind of triad of parish, family and school. And to be honest with you, you know, the parish and the family were what we were kind of mainly speaking about. There were a lot of representatives of the homeschool movement were there. You know, various people talking about, you know, homeschool curriculum, people who have had an experience of that in the family tent as well. There were absolutely tons of kids. I mean, they were just like everywhere, and just, you know, you know, just running around, having the time of their life. And I mean, as far as I know, I didn't attend anything that spoke necessarily about the kind of school system as such. But in terms of kind of education in the faith, you know, that was what it was all about. Whether that takes place in the school, whether that takes place in the parish, or whether that takes place, I think, in the family mainly. You know, that was a huge part of it.
In some ways, that's more hopeful, because I think people are starting to remember their primary responsibility as parents, and that this isn't something we have to outsource. It's great to hear that there were children, that it was full of families, young people. We were just saying, weren't we, Emily, that we went to a wedding, a Catholic wedding recently, and it was full of kids running around, and how rare that is now. You know, you get invited to a wedding and people say, don't bring your kids. You just think, what? When did that happen? I'll come to you in a minute, Piero, about the people that you spoke to for your own podcast, and we'll perhaps direct people to view that. But Emily, you were there as a young convert. So you converted to the faith only just over a year ago. Yeah. And you also messaged me and said, this is a wonderful experience. How was it for you as a young convert, and for those around you, other young people? What was your sense?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think it was really hopeful, as we've already discussed, but also it was just so great to see everyone celebrating what it means to be a Catholic. And I think, you know, we've already spoken about the different events that were going on in the different tents, but also the different masses that we had. We had obviously Novus Order, Latin Mass, Ukrainian liturgy. And I think that as well, like
Syro Malabar as well.
Oh yeah, sorry, missed that one. But I think that really kind of broadcasts the spectrum of Catholicism and how great that is in our country, that we're able to celebrate all forms of that. And as we've already mentioned, lots of kids, I mean, all ages were there. So we really had the full representation of the church, a lot of religious. Yeah, it was just a really amazing experience. And I think it kind of set all our hearts on fire, I would say, as Catherine of Siena said. But yeah, I just think it was really important as well to kind of unite everyone in that hope, and to set us all out there with our kind of, like, I guess, missions in the church to go out and spread the gospel even further, and hopefully next year to make it an even bigger event.
Yeah, it must be nice for you, because I know that you are often surrounded by people in the secular world, in the place that you work in, and then you convert to the faith, and there's no doubt it's been a challenge, it's been difficult, and you try to live your faith, not be ashamed of it, stand up for your faith publicly, and that often is met with at least an inquisition, if not criticism. And so for you to be in this family, this Catholic family of all these people who share the faith, must have been wonderful for you as a young convert.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would describe it. It felt like one big family event. And I think, you know, there are several times we were thinking, oh, can we just leave our bags here? And then we thought, yeah.
There are no Catholic thieves, okay?
No Catholic thieves. But no, I don't know. I obviously have never been to an event like this to compare it to, but I've been to, you know, I've been on school trips, I've been on festivals and things like that where you do have that sense of like belonging and kind of like a freedom. But this was emphasized so much more, that kind of feeling of like being at peace with your surroundings. And I don't know, you just felt completely it was almost like ethereal, really. I think that feeling of just being so present in the moment, and you kind of forget about everything that's going on in the outside world, and you're focused on the church, and like being a Catholic. And we also had, I think on the second and third night, they had adoration all throughout the night as well, which was a really comforting thing to think about when you're, you know, going to bed, that there are people there worshiping the Lord all throughout the night. So yeah, it was just an amazing feeling and amazing to be a part of it.
That's wonderful to hear. And Piero, you mentioned some of the key names there, some of the people who were giving talks. And I know that you spoke to a number of people for your own podcast. Who were some of the people that you spoke to that you really thought, wow, this is an amazing conversation. It's great to meet them.
Yeah, so I had the sort of privilege to introduce Saint Gianna Moller's daughter, who gave one of the plenary talks. So Saint Gianna Moller, doctor, kind of pro-life martyr, and a wonderful woman, and together with her husband, real kind of examples of Christian holiness, especially in marriage. And she gave a talk to the whole crowd, and it was really beautifully inspiring. You know, every time I've listened to her speak, I've wanted to be a better Christian, a better husband, you know, a holier person. So, you know, in the end, that's what it's all for. The other person that I spoke to is a real kind of hero of mine, is Sir James Macmillan, the Scottish composer. And he was just kind of walking around just saying, this is fantastic, it's fantastic. And, you know, this is a guy who has been, you know, really accepted as, you know, a kind of musical genius, both from the, you know, in the secular world and in the religion. In fact, he only really writes religious music. You know, he'll get secular, you know, he'll be asked to compose a piece for, you know, the anniversary of a transport company or something, and he'll set it to the Gregorian chant melody of, you know, O Come Emmanuel or something, you know. So he just can't, and you know, he spoke about this with such kind of open, and just to see the depth of talent that, you know, you almost don't know kind of where it comes from. Talk about like infused knowledge. You know, he grew up in a little town on the sort of in Ayrshire, and has become this kind of giant of classical music across the world. So that was beautiful. I managed to I spoke to, as I said, to Professor Bullivant, Hannah Vaughan Spruce, and Bernadette Durkin, who've done a lot of work on where, you know, he in 2019 he wrote a book called Mass Exodus about Catholic disaffiliation, and, you know, 5 years later he's writing a book about how the church is kind of back and where it's growing, you know, among the sort of different ethnic chaplaincies, among university students, and among the traditional movement. You know, really a real overview of where kind of good things are happening. And I mean, you know, I don't want to say kind of, you know, diversity is our strength or anything like that, but really you got the feeling, but there you got the feeling that it really is. Because, you know, it was a diversity kind of within limits, in the sense that we were, you know, obviously we're all there, we have one faith, but
yeah,
you know, not to think that we need to look for uniformity. You know, the church has such a variety of kind of expressions. You know, you saw the Syro-Malabar, the Ukrainians, the traditionalists, the you know, there was a lot of kind of praise and worship going on, but what you really saw is that when then in front of the Eucharist, the attitude to the Eucharist was identical in all those groups. You know, there was a kind of a strength of devotion, of care, of piety that was absolutely kind of clear for all to see. I mean, my future son-in-law, who's a recent convert from Islam, this was his first kind of big Catholic event, and you know, I was just so happy for him to be at something that I could literally say to him, go to anything and you'll hear good stuff. You know, you don't have to worry about any of that. Whereas I think a lot of the events that I've been to in the past, I'm not sure if I would have been able to say that, right?
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear that. That's very encouraging. And only Christ can hold that diversity and unity. I think when there's attempts to do anything outside of Christ, it necessarily becomes incoherent and crumbles. And we see that with the, you know, the DIE programs. It becomes the opposite almost of what it's intended to do. But in Christ only can we have, exactly as you've said, that true diversity, all under the unity of Christ, only in the church. So it's great to hear that and you felt confident to say, go to anything, because as you say, for so long, this feels very encouraging. It's a shame Gavin and Mark couldn't join us, because they'd have loved this conversation, but it just so happens they couldn't be with us tonight. The clergy, Piero, you were talking about the recent influx of young people, and Cardinal Nichols was interviewed for the Express just this week. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and he was talking about that as well, and especially young men, he was saying. So this is definitely something that's growing. Was he there? Was there a number of clergy there? Was there a good presence of the bishop?
Yeah, I know that Cardinal Nichols is on I think it's the diocesan pilgrimage to Lourdes at the moment, but the hierarchy was well represented. You know, the Archbishop of Cardiff was there, the Archbishop of Birmingham was there, the Archbishop of Southwark was there. I think he was there for the whole thing, and yeah, and there were loads of diocesan priests, lots of priests from different orders. There was like a multiplicity of fantastic, you know, different habits. There were nuns all over the place. I mean, one of the most beautiful experiences was during the TLM on Sunday rather, which was celebrated in Pugin's incredible chapel there. The chant was sung by a group of enclosed Benedictine nuns who had, and yeah, I mean, I thought it seemed extremely well supported by the clergy. I think the bishops' conference wasn't kind of, you know, it wasn't like an official thing by them, but you know, there were enough bishops around to really get that feeling that they had supported it strongly. And in particular, I think the bishops who you know, who you see at all the good stuff, you know, they were really kind of there and supportive and gave some really stonking homilies. You know, one thing that I was really amazed about was that it was just the kind of how historically kind of rooted as well everything that had happened there. You know, the history of the church in this country was spoken about. The persecution that Catholics had undergone was spoken about. You know, the example of the martyrs of this country. You know, the backdrop to the main stage where the masses happened. There was this huge kind of blown up images from the Wilton diptych. So there was a real kind of together with a beautiful crucifix painted by a current UK artist, but the real connection with the Catholic past of England. And you know, I think we're at the point now where on any given Sunday, the biggest single denomination of practicing Christians is the Catholics.
Yeah.
And you know, you got that feeling that, okay, you know, we've been squashed, we've been persecuted, you know, we've been turned into a minority, but now we're back and we're ready to kind of claim this country for Christ and for his church again. And we'll do it through you know, extremely solid intellectual argument, you know, in the Truth Tent, which was full of Dominicans. We'll do it through, you know, absolute beauty, you know, with people like Sir James Macmillan, you know, poets and artists who spoke in the Beauty Tent, with all the charitable works that we do, whether at home or abroad, which was spoken about in the goodness tent, with the big families who met in the family tent, with the fun and that kind of very Catholic sense of being together. There was a great the coffee twins, who are two guys who run a coffee business. They also run one of the chapters at Chartres, I think.
The twins,
building. Yeah. We're running the cafe. So it was just I know I'm sort of gushing about it, but it was
no
really
gush.
wonderful.
This is very welcome gushing. I think it sounds wonderful. We're back. What a message. We're back. I love that. And the idea of the truth, beauty, and goodness tent. What a good idea. As you're describing, I think yes, it's the different ways in. This is for the tent full of Dominicans. Sure. I love it, Emily. We were talking about clergy there. You told me that you spent some time with some seminarians who you met. They come over from the US, is that right?
Yeah, so they were the seminarians of the Divine Mercy, Marian Divine Mercy people. I don't know.
Chris Alar's people.
Oh, the guys all in white, right?
Yeah, Chris Alar's people.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it was really nice. They said that they're quite young. One of them's a deacon about to become a priest, and the others are due to become a deacon in September. And they both come over from the States, and I think they just got here, so they were a bit, like, oh, how do I acclimatize to being in Britain? So they were asking a lot of practical questions, like, what's the etiquette on the bus or whatever. But ultimately, I think they also felt that it was a really promising time, really hopeful time to be a Catholic in Britain, and they'd observed that it also seemed to be just full of life and full of Catholic life, and it's so amazing for other people to come in and see that and have that impression. And I think they're excited to be now in London, working in London, and I think it's given them a lot of hope for their kind of apostolate in London, and which is really great as well.
That's brilliant. It was Father Toby in the truth tent, Emily.
Yeah. Well, he had a Radio Maria stage as well, which was also lots of fun. But he did do a couple in the truth tent as well.
Excellent. What would your secular friends make of it? Your friends that we've mentioned already, those people that you grew up around before you were Catholic, if they were dropped in the middle of it, what do you think their impression would be?
Well, I think at first, before they got there, they would be confused as to what they were going to, but it was just so lovely. I almost think it's an event for anyone. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be Catholic to appreciate the beauty and the goodness and the truth of the church. And I think that it was a real testament to that. It really did, these speakers are so accessible. I think that a lot of my secular friends would have learned a lot and taken away a lot from being there, although probably the lack of sleepless nights would have confused them. There was no alcohol, which was good, and also we all got like a lot of sleep, which I was really concerned about, obviously being in a tent, but I think I had more sleep I would have done at home, which was great. I'm not sure about you, Piero, if you had the sleep.
Well, yeah, all my kids were camping. We fortunately had a little room in the seminary, which was very nice. But one of the things that I thought was very funny, it definitely had that kind of kind of festival vibe. But what you definitely saw was that when the tents came out, they weren't those little festival tents, or a lot of them weren't. It was big Catholic tents, for mum, dad, and 6 kids, and there were some pretty impressive kind of huge tents. Can I? There's one thing that I was really impressed with. You just going back to the question of the clergy. There were a couple of things that I was really impressed with on the last mass, which was celebrated. Asking God to bless this country with more vocations. The Archbishop of Cardiff spoke about his own experience and how he came to the priesthood in a very moving way. And at the very end of the mass, he thanked all the people, who, all the faithful who in the end, are we're the ones who support the church and keep it moving. It's not just the church or the hierarchy. And then he did something very, very strange, but kind of very welcome as well. He apologized on behalf of the bishops if they had ever stopped or, if they had ever got in the way of something good that hadn't been able to kind of take root because of them in the church. And I felt very much that, that was a kind of recognition that in the end, these initiatives also that come from the laity are hugely important. And it was a kind of recognition that, everything that's good in the church doesn't always just come top down, but, will often come up from the grassroots. So I thought that was wonderful. And also to see Archbishop Bernard of Birmingham, who celebrated the main mass, Novus Ordo mass, with 2,000 people, and then within 20 minutes was in the chapel sitting with all the TLMers, there as a real father of his people. Whether you like praise and worship or whether you like polyphony, he's your father in the church. And I thought that was a wonderful kind of example. I got, sometimes when you go to these things, you get the feeling that people are kind of trying to sort of sell their sort of style to you and trying to kind of get you into their thing. Whereas I did not get that feeling at all here. The feeling that I got was that this is what the church in this country is. This is the strength of the church that we have. And the beauty of the kind of diversity of the church, or the universality of the church, is that, we can, every single person can find a home in this, in the big tree of the church, and whether whether you want to go to extremely intellectual talk and that floats your boat, or whether you want to go to something which is much simpler, or something which speaks about the church's social action, or about the church will appeal to what resonates, or can appeal to what resonates with your heart. And I really got that feeling that, right, okay, it was like that when it's kind of military leaders, they kind of survey the forces that they have before going into battle, and it felt a bit like that. Okay, these are the forces that we have at our disposal in the UK church. Right, are we ready to go? Are we ready to make it happen? Are we ready to conquer the UK for Christ? And I don't know, I got a feeling that we're quite well set, I think.
Wow. Well, if that's not the perfect place to end, it's really wonderful to talk to you both with such a hopeful message. And I was watching some of our friends in the US just the other day, and they were talking about all the awful things in the church and post-Vatican II and the degradation and the abuse and everything. And I noticed in the comments, I think it was a young person said, "Oh my gosh, it's so awful. I don't want to bring kids into this world." And I think that's terrible. that we might, be so negative and despairing that actually we leave people feeling what is, they've lost all hope. And to hear two things here from you both today: we're back, this great message of hope, and also Emily used the phrase "full of life," and you talked, Piero, about children. Have children, switch off and have children, get married first, and just there is the church, the great mess of the ark in all its splendor and diversity, but there it is, and have hope, and there's nothing more hopeful than having children and bringing children into the chaotic world, which no doubt it certainly is, but to have hope. So it's a message of hope, and I think that's wonderful as we enter our summer holidays. I'm off tomorrow morning, so I've got a long drive ahead of me. Emily, you'll be joining me in just a week, and Piero, you're off to Italy.
Yeah, off to Umbria, off to stay for a few days with the monks in Norcia, and then for a couple of family weddings in Sicily. So,
wow, lovely, brilliant. Well,
one thing that I would say, I want to name check John and Therese Withers, lovely couple, Catholic couple, who were there with their little children, who organised the whole thing with grace, with absolute meticulous eye for detail, and also just with a huge amount of faith, and it showed through in everything that happened.
Yeah, well, thank you, Emily. Any name checks we've missed that anyone you want to thank, anyone who stood out for you?
I think it's covered. All the organisers, obviously, all the clergy for being there, all of the sponsors, CTS. I think, without any of these people, it wouldn't be possible either. So, yeah.
Catholic mothers doing a wonderful job as well.
Exactly.
So yeah, and bring some of those friends next year, Emily, as you say. Let's hope that it grows, and we'll bring people who may not make sense of it immediately, but who can see all that you see, experience all that you're experiencing, and see that truth, beauty, and goodness. Well, thank you all for joining us. It's holiday season begins, and we'll continue broadcasting, but perhaps from different settings over the next few weeks. If you haven't yet, please do visit catholicunscripted.com and pick up a monthly or an annual subscription to get all our articles and some exclusive videos. And visit also the Catholic Truth Society. What would people need to do, Piero, to visit your website and see the podcasts?
So yeah, just go into YouTube, put in Catholic Truth Society, or wherever you get your podcasts. The podcast is called Into the Truth, and the 4 podcasts that we recorded on site at the festival will be up in the next couple of months.
Brilliant. Okay. Right. Thanks both for joining me. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back with Mark and Gavin very soon. God bless.